For the past couple of years, we've all felt it, right? Prices for, well, pretty much everything just kept climbing. The European Central Bank, of course, jumped into action, raising interest rates in what felt like a full-on war against inflation. But was it really?
And that's the big question we're diving into today. We all know how bad the inflation problem was. But was the ECB's solution, the cure, actually as strong as the disease? You might think the answer is obvious, but trust me, it's anything but.
And we're not just guessing here. To get to the bottom of this, we are digging into a fascinating, deep dive analysis that was prepared specifically for the European Parliament. This report compares the recent inflation fight to the major battles of the past.
So, before we can really judge the ECB's actions, we first need to understand how economists measure them in the first place. And it all boils down to one key idea, something called the monetary policy stance.
It sounds complicated, but it's really not. The stance is just a label for what the central bank is doing. Are they hitting the economic gas pedal to speed things up? Are they slamming on the brakes to slow things down? Or are they just kind of coasting? That's the stance.
You know, a really great way to think about it is like a thermostat. When the economy is overheating with high inflation, the central bank cranks up the air conditioning. That's what we call a restrictive stance. It's designed to cool everything down. So how do they know if the AC is actually on? Well, economists have a yardstick for this. They compare the current interest rate to what they call a neutral rate. You'll sometimes hear it called R-star. Think of it as the perfect Goldilocks temperature that doesn't heat up or cool down the economy. If interest rates are above that neutral level, then the policy is officially restrictive. It's a simple comparison, but it's absolutely everything.
Okay, now that we have our measuring stick, let's actually use it. The Parliament's report does exactly that, comparing this most recent crisis to two other major inflation flare-ups the ECB has dealt with.
So here are the three big periods we're putting under the microscope. First, you've got the dot-com bubble era, right around the year 2000. Then, the run-up to the big financial crises from 2006 to 2008. And of course, the cycle we've all just lived through, from 2022 until now.
First, let's just look at the size of the problem each time. I mean, look at this chart. Inflation was definitely a headache in those first two cycles, but the challenge from 2022 onward, it was in a completely different universe. The report literally calls it far stronger and more persistent. No doubt about it, this was the biggest fire the ECB ever had to fight.
Now this is where it gets really weird. Okay, so you have the biggest fire ever, right? You'd expect them to use the biggest fire hose, you'd think. But look at the peak interest rates. The ECB actually pushed rates higher in the two previous, smaller crises than they did this time around. That doesn't really add up, does it?
So we have a bigger problem, but what looks like a smaller response. And that brings us to the absolute core finding of this entire analysis, and honestly, it's pretty surprising.
Let's just put this side by side, because the contrast is so stark. On one hand, the inflation problem was, and I'm quoting the report, far stronger and more persistent. But on the other hand, the policy response was no more restrictive and actually probably less. I mean, wow. That's the whole puzzle right there.
And here it is, the main event. The report's conclusion, stated in black and white. Despite facing the worst inflation in its history, the ECB's policy stance, its actual effort to cool things down, was no stronger and maybe even weaker than in previous, less dangerous episodes. Now, this finding isn't just an interesting little piece of economic history. It raises a really important and, frankly, pretty urgent question for all of us right now. If the medicine wasn't as strong as the sickness was bad, can we really be sure the patient is cured?
And the report itself urges us to be careful. It points out three big reasons why. 1. The job of bringing inflation down simply isn't finished. 2. A lot of the recent improvement came from falling energy prices, and we all know how quickly those can swing back. And 3. Even with all the rate hikes, the financial situation today still isn't considered all that restrictive when you look at the big picture.
So it all comes down to this. This analysis shows that the ECB fought its biggest ever fire with what was, surprisingly, not its strongest response. And that leaves us with one heck of a question to chew on. If the cure wasn't as potent as the disease was powerful, have we truly broken the inflation fever? Or is it just dormant, waiting for its chance to spike all over again?